A Great Night for a Ritual is a dungeon crawler arena hybrid game where vision is limited and the player must use the many abilities available to them to defeat Dracula. The player must use purified attacks to keep the Dark Lord from being summoned, while also destroying his followers. The player's goal is to keep the ritual bar from filling up and also gaining access to the final level to either keep Dracula from gaining his strength back, or if it's too late, killing Dracula, which will give the player one of two endings. Branded enemies are placed throughout each level, which the player must purify to break the blood seal on the next level door. If branded enemies are not killed properly, they will raise from the dead and bring back fallen enemies around them. The ritual bar is always filling, but at a slow rate. Once the bar is full, then a stronger wave of enemies are spawned to the floor, thus making the game harder. The player must slay enemies using purified weapons or attacks. This purified buff is applied to using the hunter's basic attack, the Holy Bracelet, and through buffed melee weapons. The player will only have absolute vision in a circle around them as the shadows of the Dark Lord linger over the hunter. The player must be wary of what room they enter and the corners they approach. Any light sources in the player's direct line of sight will also be able to give off absolute vision. The perspective of the game is 2D top-down so that the player can position themselves accordingly to the level design. The player always has access to the level map and may choose where to begin to look for the branded enemies. Each level will be designed in relation to the 5 different enemies. So for example, the undead level will have a lot of closed corridors, forcing the player to quickly react to lunging zombies when running around corners. As the player gets to the next level, the level design changes to that enemy, which would then be goblins. The hunter chooses their quick cast talismans, which can be switched out at any time. These talismans grant the hunter new abilities in game, and also grant damage, like being able to shift through walls or vanish from enemy sight, or being able to apply a holy buff on the hunter's weapon. The list of talismans that can be activated will be no more than 10, but this will still give the player multiple combinations to work with. The bracelet can shoot beams of purifying light out of the hunter's hands, and when these uses are depleted, the bracelet goes on a small cooldown. The Purify buff also burns the enemy, and when slain, the ritual bar suffers a decrease. The player is working against the mobs of enemies that spawn into the arena and the ritual bar, which has been mentioned before. The hunter will face a new enemy on each of the 5 levels. The end level, the player will face a boss, and the vampire ascendants. The enemies that the player faces are Dracula fanatics, undead, goblins, werewolves, vampires, and ascended vampires. Each enemy introduces a new obstacle to the game that the player will have to strategize around. The player is being chased down by a mob of vampire scouts that are close-range attackers. As the hunter is shooting holy light at the enemies, the hunter suddenly vanishes, causing the mob to become unaware of where they went. The player can choose to lure one of the enemies away using their second ability. Once the player has the enemy in another room, they can then use their last ability to execute them. In this situation, the player has far more possibilities, as the controls will be set up in a way that offers quick switching of abilities. A Great Night for a Ritual will play like a dungeon crawler arena hybrid, sort of like Diablo 3 and Battlerite. The biggest difference in these games in A Great Night for a Ritual is local play, less gear, a heavy focus on abilities, and the player's biggest antagonizing force is the ritual bar and lack of vision. The development risks is that the team might not have cohesive sprite art, in which some things about the game will be developed to a simplistic aesthetic design. I'm afraid that the things the player has to do won't be as rewarding while playing the game, and the experience won't be engaging enough for the player to continue on. Thank you for watching.
Created using Powtoon.